If you enjoy puzzle games about logic and mathematics and need a quick and easy game to kill some time, consider trying out Picross. Although you might know it by other names, such as Nonogram, named after Non Ishida, who is credited as one of its inventors. The story goes that in 1987, Ishida won a competition where the participants had to form a picture by using the lights of a skyscraper, and this gave her the idea for a puzzle game in which the player has to fill certain squares in a grid. In 1988, she published her own puzzle designs with the name Window Art Puzzles. Next year, a collector of puzzles called James Dougherty liked what he saw and arranged for the rights to publish Ishida's puzzles throughout the world, using the name Nonogram, as in Non's diagram. But Ishida wanted to use the name Nonogram in Japan only for her own creations, and the deal ended in 1996. In 1998, the Sunday Telegraph held a competition to decide on a new name for their puzzles, and thus came the name Griddler. The other person credited with inventing the puzzles is Tetsuya Nishio, an avid puzzle maker who coincidentally had the same idea for a puzzle game and published it in a different magazine. Since then, he continued to publish his own puzzles, referred to as Paint by Numbers. But it has as many names as it has ways of playing it. You have countless websites freely available on your browser of choice, and countless mobile apps with a gorillion puzzles of all shapes and sizes. One such way is Pokémon Picross on the 3DS, a free-to-play with microtransactions game launched in 2015. But way before Pokémon Picross existed, there was Pokémon Picross on the Game Boy. Sometime in the late 90s, Jupiter Corporation was put in charge of developing a Picross game based on the booming monster-catching franchise. It was announced in 1999, but time moved forward and nothing came out of it. I briefly mentioned it in an old video, but I never thought that I would be able to play it one day. You see, Nintendo has been leaking a bit recently, and some very sneaky people have been releasing a lot of stuff that would put them in legal hot water. Things like beta versions of games, other unreleased titles, and even the entire source code for some Pokémon games. As a fan of the lost and the obsolete, these past months have been a treasure trove. For obvious reasons, I'm not going to tell you where to find these things, but let's just say that Google has you covered. Anyway, in Pokémon Picross, you play the role of some dingus with a Pikachu. Your goal is to become a Pokémon Picross master by exploring various places and clearing puzzles. You will also meet some Pokémon that join you on your adventure, which unlocks new background music. Besides the tutorial where Professor Oak teaches you how to play, you have 3 increasingly difficult sets of puzzles, featuring multiple maps with 15 puzzles each. Easy Picross mode has a single map with the easiest puzzles in the game, while Pokémon Picross mode is the big cheese, with 10 maps featuring 150 different Pokémon. You advance to the next map once you clear at least 8 puzzles in your current one. After clearing every map in Pokémon Picross mode, you unlock Safari Picross mode, which is mostly just more of the same except harder and with all kinds of pictures to discover. The key difference is that multiple grid puzzles only tell you if you found the answer once you finish all individual grids, and that there is an alternate marking mode that I don't quite see the point of. Obviously, you shouldn't come here expecting an epic story or anything. Pokémon Picross is all about Picross, with Pokémon. So here's how you play it. Picross is played on a grid with a bunch of numbers on the side. Your objective is to mark the correct squares using the numbers and your brain as a guide. Finding all the correct squares reveals a picture. The numbers indicate the order, the quantity and the length of the square sequences in each row or column. For example, if there's a row marked with a 2 and a 3, that means that there is a sequence with 2 consecutive squares and a sequence with 3. But keep in mind that there is always an empty square on the sides of each sequence. To help you keep track of those, you can mark them with a cross. In Pokemon Picross, you want to do that because hitting the wrong spot gives you a time penalty. And while you have a generous amount of time to solve each puzzle, doing it within the quick solve time limit grants you a Great Ball award and adds the respective picture to the Pokédex, which apparently can then be printed with the Gameboy printer add-on. You can go through the first 14 puzzles in any order, and you only need to clear 8 puzzles to advance, but scoring at least 8 Great Balls is required to access the last one. And these quick solve times aren't pissing around, and any time penalty will pretty much guarantee that you miss it, so expect to fail most of them at first. For the hardest ones, you need to make fast decisions, and to learn all the little tricks to help you solve them faster. I mean things like knowing where correct squares will always be present. For example, in a 10x10 grid, a row or column with a 7 square sequence will always have 4 correct squares in the middle. Being aware of the order in which the sequences are positioned and that there is always at least 1 square on the sides is important. Sometimes there isn't enough space for sequences between squares that you know are empty, helping you infer where the correct squares are. Picross is at its best when you chain your logic steps together. Those times when you figure out where one square is, and that tells you where another is, which in turn helps you find yet another square, and so on. It's addicting as balls and keeps your brain engaged with an explosion of dopamine. I love it. Pokemon Picross only goes from grids of 5x5 up to 15x15, but that's only the tip of the iceberg. There are puzzles with insanely big grids meant only for the craziest of addicts, and while this game's puzzles are all monochrome, color puzzles do exist. Technically, the game does have 20x20 grids, but they are separated into smaller 10x10 grids, making them significantly easier than the 15x15 grids. Regardless, you can still get a ton of mileage out of this game. There's at least a good 10 hours of ball-busting puzzle action here. It's also an excellent starting point since the puzzles gradually increase in difficulty from really easy to really hard, with the later puzzles demanding your utmost concentration if you want to earn the Great Balls. Which begs the question, why did all this work go down the toilet? The game seems complete, it's playable from start to finish, and I didn't notice any bugs or any missing content either. Maybe it could use some polish on the music and visual department, I guess? The music is kinda blah, and the shading on the Pokemon pictures looks a bit off, but besides that I don't have anything to complain about. Perhaps it was because Gold and Silver were arriving soon, and the game would seem outdated with only Generation 1 Pokemon. But then again, Pokemon Pinball only had Generation 1 Pokemon 2, and by the time it was released in April of 1999, everyone already knew that Gold and Silver were coming. I doubt it was because Nintendo wasn't confident in Jupiter's work, because they aren't just a ragtag band of literary who's. They have been in the business for nearly 30 years now, and have made more Picross games than you can shake bacon at. Pokemon Picross wasn't even the first time that they worked with Nintendo either, nor was it the last time. In fact, they worked on Pokemon Pinball. Oh, and that new Pokemon Picross? Yeah, that was Jupiter too, and the same goes for a billion other Picross games. Jupiter also previously developed games like Mario Picross, as well as the Picross NP lineup. These were distributed through Nintendo Power, a Japan-only rewritable cartridge system for the Super Famicom. There were 8 volumes in total, each with a number of puzzles and a character mode that featured characters from different Nintendo franchises. Volume 1 was focused on Pokémon. The curious thing is, Pokemon Picross isn't the puzzle's first appearance in the series. You know that demo from the 1997 Nintendo Space World? The one that got leaked 2 years ago and blew my goddamn mind? Yeah, the one with a Picross minigame programmed into it. Of course, it was scrapped and was never supposed to be seen by the public. but it shows that the idea had been there since 1997, and Voltorb Flip is most definitely partially inspired by it. Which I guess brings us back to the generations question, and why Togepi is the only Generation 2 Pokémon to make a cameo. The games had been announced for a while, so the lack of Gen 2 representatives is kind of weird, since it would be good publicity. Maybe it was simply because Nintendo thought that it wouldn't be very successful worldwide. Mario's Picross was successful in Japan and spawned a sequel for the Super Famicom, but it didn't do very well in the West. Reviews were generally positive, but despite a big marketing push, it fell below expectations in America and in Europe. They could still release it only in Japan and be done with it, but yeah. It's a shame that it never saw the light of day, because it's a fun spin-off. An exceptional and mostly just a regular Picross game with a Pokémon coat of paint, I guess, but still a solid experience. But alas, it was not meant to be. For now, it remains another forgotten mystery from the Pokémon franchise, many questions remaining without an answer.